We have the pleasure today of having as our Shaftesbury Society speaker someone who's had a connection to the John Locke Foundation older than almost everyone else in the room. I could just see a couple of exceptions, John Hood and John Sanders, who were both here before George, but otherwise, everyone else who is here has not had as long a connection to this organization as our guest speaker, George Leef, who I'll give you a little bit of background of him. He has his bachelor's degree from Carroll College in Waukesha, Wisconsin, law degree from Duke University Law School, and I think George would probably tell you he got a law degree so you don't have to, or no one else has to. If you ever want to find out what he has to say about law school and going to law school, you can ask him in the Q&A or afterward. He was a vice president at the John Locke Foundation and director of the John W. Pope Center for Higher Education Policy before the Pope Center became an independent entity. And for those who are following public policy issues in North Carolina now, it is now the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. That was at one time the Pope Center, and George was the head of it. To show you that he has had an interesting background beyond the think tank world, he's also been on the faculty of Northwood University in Midland, Michigan, taught courses in economics, business law, and logic, so a wide range of talents. He was a policy advisor in the Michigan State Senate and was book review editor of The Freeman from 1996 to 2012. He is the author of the book Free Choice for Workers, A History of the Right to Work Movement, that came out in 2005, and also edited the book Educating Teachers, The Best Minds Speak Out. But the main reason why we lined him up to speak for you today is because of his entry into the world of fiction. This new book, The Awakening of Jennifer Van Arsdale, and George is going to be telling you some about that. I'm just going to lead into it by saying that if you look on the back of the book, the tee up for the story is very compelling. And I'm just going to give you the very first part of the first sentence. Progressive journalist Jennifer Van Arsdale was thrilled to be chosen to write the biography of America's first woman president. I'll leave it at that because that sort of sets the table for all that's to come. And welcome, please, everyone, to the John Locke Foundation, George Leef.
Thanks, Mitch. Pleasure to be here for the renewal of Shaftesbury in person, live and in person. It's nice that America's starting to finally get back on track. Good to see you folks here. At least some of you know that I've spent pretty much my whole adult life writing policy stuff. Papers and book reviews and articles and so forth. And it never really occurred to me to try my hand at fiction until summer of 2020. And of course, during the campaign season, it looked like the Democrats were going to sweep everything. And there was all this giddy talk from the AOC types and Bernie Sanders and Democrat pundits about all the wonderful things that were going to be done when they had total power, and how we'd pack the Supreme Court and crack down on hate speech and pass more gun control laws and have the economic reset that the country needs. All of those things, they were so giddy about that. I was less than giddy, and in fact, I thought this is terrifying. What would the country be like if they got their way? Suppose Biden wins and we have to put up with 8 years of these radical, I don't call them liberals, by the way. I'll get to that in a minute, but we don't call them liberals. Radical progressives, having their way, cementing their power. What if we had to put up with 8 years of that? What would the United States be like after that? Would there be any chance of ever coming back to normality, of ever regaining any of the freedom that we've been losing for more than a century? And I was kind of dejected thinking about that prospect. But at that point, the idea of this book entered my mind. What would happen if some true believing left-winger got a dose of reality and changed her mind and started trying to change other people's minds? Well, that's the premise of the book. And I don't want to give too much away. I hope you all want to buy a copy. But I do want to talk about the substance of the book, the big question that I raise in the book, which is this: are we past the point of no return? In the book, one of the characters says to Jennifer he thinks we are past the point of no return. And what he means by that is that the forces of statism, the so-called progressives, have accumulated so much power, have cemented themselves so thoroughly into the country's structure, that he saw no way of a comeback. He saw nothing but a steady downward spiral, like you see in other countries that have succumbed to statism. Venezuela, Argentina, Britain all succumbed to statism. Steady downward spiral, some faster than others. Well, he was pretty pessimistic. I'm a little bit less pessimistic than my character, though. I think there is a chance, and that's what I want to talk about today, is the takers versus the makers. Is it over? Is the fight over? Or is it still possible that we might defeat the takers? Now, I call them takers. You know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the AOCs. I'm talking about the Nancy Pelosi's, the Chuck Schumers. I'm talking about the big guy, Joe Biden. They're all takers. What they have in mind is taking your property and taking away a whole lot of your freedom, because they have goals, they have visions that must be attained, and that can only be attained by they need wealth. They need to restrain people who would oppose them. And so they want to take your property, take your freedom. So I call them takers. I don't call them liberals, because they are simply not liberal. Liberal used to be a good word. It used to mean something. It used to mean people who believed in liberty. Adam Smith was a liberal because he wanted to liberate the people of England from the control of domineering institutions like guilds and government with its restrictions on trade and so forth. Frederick Bastiat was a great liberal. He believed in liberating the people of France. Ludwig von Mises was a liberal, believed in freedom. So let's not ever again call the takers liberals. Let's call them authoritarians. Let's call them statists. Let's call them takers. I think the first thing all is to get the language correct. Orwell knew how important that was. So we'll call them takers. Now, these takers are absolutely certain that their vision is correct, that anyone who disagrees with them disagrees only because that person is immoral, greedy, stupid, venal. They think that the people on the other side, the makers, I think everyone in this room probably fits into that description, the makers, we should simply shut up, pay taxes, obey all their directives. We have no moral standing to complain about anything that they do. Now let's look at a bit of history. I'm going to back up to the year 1908. Choose 1908 for a good reason. My grandfather was a young man in 1908. He was 22, and he got an idea for a business that I'm happy to say still thrives. But what was America like in 1908? Well, at all levels, government consumed less than 10% of the GDP. There were very, very few laws. People could pretty much do what they wanted to do. There were no laws telling him who he could hire and who he had to fire. There were no income taxes. Our money was stable. We were on the gold standard. Government did very, very little. People had spoken about how infrequently they came into contact with government officials back in those days. So it was pretty easy for him, with a little bit of mechanical knowledge and a good business idea, to be successful. as were millions of other Americans. That's, of course, what drew people to our shores from around the world. This was a place where you could succeed or fail based on your own efforts. The government would not do anything for you. It wouldn't do anything against you. It was up to you. There was a culture of liberty. A golden rule ethic prevailed in the United States in those days. I'll live my life, you live your life. Let me succeed, I'll let you succeed. We'll trade if we see that that's beneficial. That was the ethos of America back then. It was an ethos of freedom. People didn't look to the government to solve their problems. They didn't look to the government expecting a handout. No one said, I want to go to college, give me a government loan. Nobody said, I have a business idea, but I need government financing for it. No one said those things. People didn't expect that. But in the population, there were some takers, and they were frustrated people. They wanted to be able to live at the expense of others, but there was no way for them to do that. They could ask. They could ask you to support their causes that they liked. They could ask you to join a union if that's what they wanted, but you had the freedom to say no. Takers don't like to be told no. So, over time, they worked assiduously to change the culture of the United States. They worked to get laws passed that would allow them to dictate to people. Laws like the National Labor Relations Act, for instance, that allowed for compulsory unionism. In the old days, Americans would have said, look, if you want to join a union, that's okay. If you don't, well, that's your right too. But no, they wanted compulsion. These days, of course, they've gone way beyond that, and now they want to stifle free speech. The old takers used to be more or less content just to siphon off some of the wealth produced by our abundant economy. Today's new takers, the AOC types, they're not content with that. They want to reset. They're so convinced of their morality and the immorality of capitalism, freedom, that they want to reset the economy. They want full-fledged socialism. And they won't take no for an answer. They're not asking us to agree with them. They're saying, we're going to do this, and you're just going to obey us. Much as we found out with COVID. Give these people power, and they will run with it. So they got all these laws passed. But much more than that, they took control of the education system. Vital. The left-wingers, the socialists, going way back to the Fabian socialists in Britain, have known all along that if they want to get their way, they have to change the way people think. And oh, have they been successful in taking over the education system, top to bottom. Now we find that kids as young as preschool are getting indoctrination into critical race theory and gender theory. And it was bad enough in the old days when they simply would indoctrinate kids about economic fallacies. In the old days, you'd hear, oh, FDR saved the country from the Depression with the New Deal. Well, false, but that's what many people were led to believe. Heck, I remember hearing that when I was back in grades, in high school. They would tell people about the terrible robber barons and lead you to believe that the poor consumer was being ripped off. Truth, of course, is prices were falling and quality was improving, but you'd never hear that. The left is so taken over education that all students ever hear is how good government is, how bad freedom is. And this registers with them. That's why lots and lots of people these days automatically pull the lever for Democratic candidates and automatically contribute to left-wing causes. They've been conditioned to believe that big government is good, freedom's a bad thing. And of course, they also control the media. It's been a long time since you had honest journalists who would just let the facts speak for themselves. The takers expect their media allies to slant every story in favor of government is good, freedom is bad. Democrats are moral people, Republicans are immoral people. Consider Charles Koch, for instance. He gets smeared anytime he says anything, just because the left wing hates him. Now, all of this registers in the minds of people. It's been registering for a long time. And that's why the culture of the United States has shifted so dramatically away from a culture of freedom, liberty, live and let live, golden rule, into a culture of let's look to the government for everything we want. Let's use coercion. That's the first and only thing that most people now think of is what can we have to get the government to do to solve these problems? What they've really done is they've turned the law, which used to be a shield for our rights, into a sword that they use against us. And after that election of 2020, you have to think, we're in dire straits. These people have enormous power. Not only do they have the education system, the media on their side, the presidency, Congress, the massive federal bureaucracy, which of course is nothing but a huge number of takers. Think about the 47,000 TSA employees alone, takers. They also get to spend federal money, vast sums of federal money, to help buy support. And they do that shamelessly. They ladle out money that they've created out of thin air and give it to their friends. They're very good at that. So what are the chances of fighting back against this juggernaut of governmental control? If freedom has been shrinking ever since 1908, the last time it didn't shrink, by the way, the last president under whom there was actually no shrinkage of freedom, Calvin Coolidge. Ever since then, government has been growing bigger, more obtrusive, more aggressive, more venal, ever since Calvin Coolidge. Every now and then we elect someone like Ronald Reagan who talks a good game, but the government kept on growing, the Federal Register kept ballooning, the attacks on our freedom never stopped. So do we really have a chance against these people? Here's one other way to think about it. Back in my grandfather's day, there was no question that the United States was the freest country there was. Where do we rank these days? Well, the Heritage Foundation puts out a very nice summary, a very good analysis of countries with respect to the level of freedom. In the last Heritage Foundation survey, the United States fell from 20 to 25. So there are now 24 countries in the world that are freer than the United States. And if we have to put up with much more of Biden, like the disinformation board, or whatever he wants to call it, I think the United States will continue falling like a stone as far as economic freedom goes. So, all this being the case, mounting government power, government control over education, the media, is there really any chance? Well, I'm subtly optimistic that we may still have a chance. To use John Sanders' phrasing in a very nice review he wrote of Awakening, I am subtly optimistic. We have a few things going for us. Like what? Well, the rule of law is under threat, but it's not gone. There are still some judges who don't believe in this ridiculous living constitution notion, which means it's whatever they say that they want it to mean. And they will strike down bad laws. Now, of course, those judges, they're targets. The takers would love to get rid of them. They'll use any tactics possible to get rid of them. But we still have some life is left in the rule of law in America. That's a good thing. We have a few good journalists on our side. I'm thinking in particular of Project Veritas, which just is driving the takers crazy. They've ginned up this ridiculous lawsuit. The Department of Justice, which of course now is the Department of Injustice, is attacking James O'Keefe and Project Veritas over this ridiculous assertion about Ashley Biden's diary. But that shows that we still have some power in the media. We can still get under the skin of the takers. We should use it more. What else is going for us? Well, we have a great deal of intellectual firepower on our side. We have the great scholars of the past who have written about the virtues of freedom and the problems that are entailed by statism. People like Adam Smith, Frederick Bastiat, Ludwig von Mises, Thomas Sowell, still living, I'm happy to say, the late Walter Williams. We need to familiarize people with what they said. And that's part of what I try to do in the book. Some of my characters say things that Thomas Sowell would say, for instance. And I think that if you use fiction, you can sometimes convey a message more effectively than if you ask someone to read a Thomas Sowell book. They might not want to do that, but I smuggled a lot of Thomas Sowell into one or more of my characters. What else do we have going up for us? Well, the biggest thing we have going for us, I think, is the utter failure of the statists, the takers. They keep talking about the great future they're building for people, but it never happens. And I think the American populace is starting to wake up to that fact. That they promise prosperity, and yet what do we see? We see inflation ramping up rapidly. And they promise peace and harmony, yet we've got racial division that's clearly worse than it was just a few years ago. COVID has done wonders in damaging their brand, so to speak. Just think about all the lives, the businesses, the education that were disrupted, ruined because of arrogant, ignorant government officials drunk on power during COVID. This is an opening, folks. This has led to a great deal of hot iron to strike. Trust in government is now at a low ebb. That's a darn good thing. People should never have trusted government. They should always be wary of government. Most people don't know this quotation, but George Washington once said, "Government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force." Oh boy, have Americans gotten a load of that over the last couple of years. Government is force. And if people used to believe the civics blather about government officials are animated by doing whatever is in the public interest, I think a lot of people now know that that's baloney. They don't do what is in the public interest. They don't follow the science. What they follow is their own inclination to authoritarianism. That's what they follow. And a lot of people have realized that these public officials lie, they squelch dissent, they attack anyone who disagrees with them, and they're clearly not, and they're hypocritical. Oh, that's an important point too. The hypocrisy is so glaring. All these officials who say you've got to wear a mask, and yet they get rid of them whenever they feel that it's in their interest to do so. You know, Gavin Newsom out in California, or the governor of Michigan, Standartenführer Wittmer. You know, these are people who are jokes. And a lot of Americans say, yeah, I get it now. These people are not our servants, they're our enemies.
We're all dying to know who it was. That'll teach you self-conversation.
Yeah. So, they're damaged goods. What we need to do is launch a counterattack against the whole left-wing mindset of letting the government run things because they're the experts. They're so well informed and they're so moral. I think people are now ready for a counterattack. And it's not going to be good enough just to oust Biden and kick out Nancy Pelosi in 2022 and elect some Republicans. That's not even close. What we've got to do is rebuild that culture of freedom that prevailed in America back in 1908. How do we do that? Well, each and every one of us can be an opinion leader in our own little spheres. We know a lot of people, and we can help to convince them that the country is on a disastrous course, and the way to get off this disastrous course is to once again look to what made America work, which was private property, rule of law, individual freedom, individual responsibility. Let's explain to people how much damage the government has done to our lives, liberty, property. I think people are now going to be willing to listen. People who wouldn't have listened 2 years ago, a lot of them will say, yeah, I get it now. The government's the enemy. Albert J. Nock wrote this great book in 1935, Our Enemy, the State. Well, I think a lot of people will say, yeah, that's really right. The state is the enemy. The state isn't doing us any good. So let's launch a counterattack. I'm hoping that each and every one of you in the room will participate in that counterattack. And that's why I wrote the book. I think a lot of people will listen to, gain messages from a work of fiction, whereas they might not in a scholarly book. But as I said, I packed a whole lot of my old professorial lessons about economics and philosophy, history into the book. But if we don't turn things around, I think people can see where we're heading. Where we're heading is toward the kind of authoritarian society that most of us would cringe at. Think about the Soviet Union with all these vague laws. Stalin's henchman, Lavrentiy Beria, said, show me the man and I'll show you the crime. And he could accuse anybody of anything to get rid of people they didn't like. We're trending in that direction. More and more vague laws that the officialdom can use any way they want to attack whoever they want to get rid of. I think Americans are about ready to say, yeah, I get that. I don't want that. Let's change not just the policy makers, let's change the whole culture of the country. So that's why I'm subtly optimistic. The statist, the taker's mindset is all just based on an intellectual house of cards, one belief after another that is just flat out contradicted by reality. And I think over the next few years, more and more people are going to get a whiff of reality, a breeze of reality. It's going to knock down that intellectual house of cards, as I had happen to my character Jennifer in the book. So that's my message. That's why I wrote the book. Glad you all came, and I'd be happy to talk about this for the rest of the hour. Anyway.